I return home to find my private sanctuary invaded by 100 strangers. The HOA president just smiles, holding a rental contract with my forged signature. She thought her petty power play would work, but she made one critical error. She didn't just trespass on my property. She forged a document and tried to use it to bully a man who built his career on proving lies. This is how her entire neighborhood came crashing down over a single party. For a long time, the smell of sawdust and fresh paint was my only comfort. It was a new way for me to find peace. For 67 years of my life, I had been busy with two things, either in a courtroom as a lawyer or on a construction site, building a case or building a house. After my wife Helen passed away, the silence in our old home was too hard to handle. The quiet felt heavy and loud. I knew I needed a change, a new project to focus my mind and my heart on. That's when I found this place. It was a worn-out, forgotten lakefront house in a very quiet suburb in North Carolina. The neighborhood was known for having a homeowners association, or HOA, that was very particular about its rules. Most people would have run away from a place with so many rules, but I thought their strictness would actually guarantee the peace and quiet I was searching for. I wanted a place where no one would bother me. I wanted to heal in peace. The house itself was a mess. It had porches that were falling apart and windows that shook loudly every time the wind blew, but I could see past the problems. I saw that it had good bones, as they say. It was a strong, well-built house underneath all the damage. Helen and I had always dreamed of a place like this, a big project for us to work on together in our retirement. Now it was just me, but I decided to do it for her. I paid for the house with cash using the money I had saved carefully over a lifetime of hard work. I spent the next 6 months of my life bringing it back to life. I put all my energy into it, pouring my heart and soul into every single detail. I worked from sunup to sundown, sanding, painting, hammering, and building. It was a slow and steady process, but every finished room felt like a small victory. Every fresh coat of paint was a step toward a new beginning. I did everything by the book, just like I had done for 30 years as a lawyer. I was a man who believed in rules and order. I made sure to get every single permit from the county. I had every single part of the house inspected, and I kept a detailed record of every step of the work. I even went to the county office and filed a formal request to operate the property as a short-term rental just in case I ever wanted to do that. It was a long process with a lot of paperwork, but I did it. I had the official stamped and dated PDF from the county clerk's office to prove it. The date on the document was March 3rd. It wasn't about the money. It was about options. It was about proving that this old house was officially and completely mine, down to the very last legal detail. My new piece was built on a solid foundation of paperwork. That solid foundation was shaken on a Saturday morning in early spring. An email arrived in my inbox. The sender was Brenda Evans, the HOA president. I had only met her once before at a quick gathering by the mailboxes. She had given me a brief, overly wide smile. Her email was coded in that same fake kindness. She said she wanted to know if she could hold a little get-together for the neighborhood welcome committee at my house. She praised the work I had done, calling my home the crown jewel of the lake. The flattery was a bit too much, but I just saw it as a normal part of neighborhood life. I wrote back to her politely but firmly. "Thank you for the kind words, Brenda," I typed. "But the house isn't ready for guests just yet. My wife's ashes are still on the mantle, and I'm not quite ready for parties." It was the honest truth. Helen's ashes were in a beautiful cherrywood box right over the fireplace I had just restored. That spot was sacred to me. It was a place for me to remember her and feel close to her. I hit send on the email and thought that was the end of it. I thought my polite refusal was clear and final. The next day, I drove to the hardware store for wood stain and sealant, leaving the mansion quiet and empty. When I returned an hour later, my quiet road was lined with white catering vans. My heart didn't just sink, it froze. At the end of my driveway were two professional signs, event parking, with the HOA logo. I'd triple-checked the lock, but now my front door was wide open. The smell of sawdust and peace was being replaced by the sound of clattering plates and strange voices. This wasn't a mistake. This was a violation. Inside my home, The home I was still trying to heal in, strangers were unfolding chairs and setting up buffet tables. String lights were already draped across the porch beams. A man in a white chef's coat was telling two others where to place a large metal food warmer. He saw me and smiled, wiping his hands on his apron. "You must be the owner," he said, his voice echoing in my foyer. "Place looks great." Brenda wasn't kidding. I just stared at him, unable to speak. He must have mistaken my shock for confusion. "Oh, don't worry. We're right on schedule for tonight's event," he added cheerfully. "We'll be all set up by 5. I finally found my voice. "What event?" I asked. "I never approved any event." The caterer's smile disappeared. He pulled out his phone, tapping the screen a few times. "That's funny," he said, his tone shifting from friendly to businesslike. "Oh yeah, Brenda said you approved it weeks ago. She sent us a contract and everything." He turned his phone screen toward me, and there it was, a formal-looking rental agreement for my property for that very evening. It listed all the services, food, staff, and a timeline. At the bottom, as clear as day, was my own digital signature, the one I had used for court filings and contracts for 30 years. It was a perfect copy, but I had never ever seen this document before in my life. The caterer, sensing the sudden tension, scrolled down. "She's got 97 guests who have already said yes," he said, his voice now filled with concern. "Is there a problem?" A problem? A complete stranger had forged my name, rented out my private home, and invited nearly 100 people into the place I came to find peace, all without my knowledge or permission. This wasn't a mistake. This was a home invasion disguised as a neighborhood party. My first thought wasn't to yell or scream. It was to secure my home. I walked past the shocked caterer, out my front door, and down the long gravel driveway to the main gate. It was a heavy black iron gate, and I swung it shut. The loud click of the heavy latch was satisfyingly final. I twisted the key in the lock, then turned back to face the small crowd of confused workers on my property. I addressed the head caterer calmly. "I'm sorry you've been put in this position," I said, "but there is no event here today. You and your staff need to pack up your equipment and leave." He started to protest, mentioning the money Brenda had paid as a deposit. But I held up a hand. "That is between you and her," I said, my voice flat and even. "This is private property, and you are now trespassing. Please go." The authority in my voice, the kind I had developed after decades in a courtroom, cut through his confusion. He nodded slowly and began telling his team to pack up. I walked back inside my house and picked up my phone. It was 4:15 in the afternoon. I found Brenda Evans's number in the HOA directory and dialed. She answered on the second ring, her voice dripping with fake cheerfulness. "Michael, so glad you're getting into the community spirit." I kept my tone level. "Brenda, there's been a mistake. There is no party at my house today. I've asked the caterers to leave." The fake warmth in her voice vanished, replaced by a cold, mean sigh. "Michael, don't make this difficult," she said as if she were speaking to a stubborn child. "The entire neighborhood is looking forward to this. It's just one evening. Don't be so selfish." The word selfish hung in the air between us. I looked at the cherrywood box on the mantel. Selfish? This wasn't about a party. This was about the one sacred space I had left to honor her, to honor us. And Brenda had turned it into a bargaining chip in her pathetic game of power. That was when I knew this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. This was a game of power. She was trying to show me who was in charge. I ended the call without another word and turned my attention to the real problem, the contract. I had asked the caterer to email me a copy before he left. I opened the file on my laptop. It was a standard PDF document. It looked real and convincing, but a forged document is like any lie. It always leaves a trail. I took a screenshot of the entire document, attached it to a new email, and sent it to my niece Sarah. The subject line was simple. "Uncle Michael, urgent question." Sarah is a paralegal, and she's smarter than anyone I know when it comes to digital paperwork. While I waited for Sarah to call me back, I scoured the document myself. A lie, like a poorly built house, always has a crack. And then I found it. The dates didn't line up. The email was sent on April 10th, but the document itself was created weeks earlier on March 15th. She had forged this before she even pretended to ask for my permission. The trap was set weeks in advance. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Uncle Michael," she said, her voice all business. "Where did you get this?" I explained the whole situation to her. She was silent for a moment, then said, "Okay, I see the problem. This is careless work." She explained it to me in simple terms. A digital file like a PDF has hidden information inside it. It's called metadata. It's like a birth certificate for the document showing who created it and, most importantly, when it was created. Brenda had emailed the signed contract to the caterer on April 10th, but the PDF's metadata showed it was actually created on March 15th. She had made the forgery weeks ago, long before she even emailed me to ask for permission. She never intended to ask. She was just creating a fake paper trail to cover her tracks. Just as this realization settled in, a new email notification popped up. It was from the HOA's official email account. The message was short and to the point. It said that my refusal to host the pre-approved community event was a violation of the neighborhood's rules. They were fining me $2,000 a day until I did as they told me and opened my gate. The email also mentioned that I had given a verbal agreement to Brenda weeks prior. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a planned attack. They weren't just trespassing. They were trying to build a legal case against me based on a complete lie. But they made a huge mistake. They didn't know who they were dealing with, and they didn't know about my front door. I had installed a security camera the day I moved in. It records every visitor, every sound, and every motion. It saves everything to a secure online server with a timestamp. I pulled up the video archive for the last 2 months. I saw the mail carrier, package deliveries, and even a raccoon that tried to make a home in my flower pot. What I didn't see was a single visit from Brenda Evans or any other member of the HOA board. There was no verbal agreement because there was no conversation. They had never even been to my door. Their lie was directly contradicted by a video log they had no idea existed. As if on cue, another email arrived, but this one was a forwarded message sent to me by a neighbor, Tom. He was a retired electrical worker who didn't like the HOA very much. The original email was from Brenda, sent to the entire HOA email group. It read, "It seems Mr. Vance is having a difficult time. He's just bitter. Single men are like that. Don't worry about the party, everyone. I've got the keys." I read that last line twice. I've got the keys. I hadn't given anyone keys. How did she get into my house? The shock that had been simmering all afternoon finally burned away, replaced by something cold and hard inside me. It was the same feeling I used to get in the courtroom right before a closing argument, when I knew without a doubt that I had the other side trapped. I looked from the forged PDF on my screen to the cherrywood box on my mantel. They hadn't just trespassed on my property. They had trespassed on my grief. They had brought their petty politics and lies into my sanctuary, the one place where I was trying to find healing. I sat back in my chair and said the words out loud to the empty room. "You just forged a document on a lawyer's house." I paused, taking a slow, steady breath. "I hope you kept the receipt." The rest of the weekend was a blur of quiet fury. I didn't yell or rage. I organized. On Monday morning, 1 week before Brenda's imaginary party, my kitchen table looked just like my old office before a major trial. A fresh legal pad sat next to a steaming mug of black coffee. I had a new manila folder, and on the tab I wrote in neat block letters, "Evans v. Forgery, Trespass." The anger had cooled into a single sharp point of focus. This was no longer just a personal insult. It was a legal case to be built brick by brick with facts that could not be denied. My first task was to write down the proof in a way a judge could understand in seconds. People think digital evidence is complicated, but it's usually the opposite. It's brutally simple if you know where to look. I wanted to create a guide for myself and for anyone else who might face something like this. So, I wrote down the steps. How to prove it. Tip number 1, match the file data to the email data. I opened the forged PDF Brenda had sent. On a computer, you can find the hidden information in the file properties. It tells you everything: the author, the title, and the two most important dates, the creation date and the modification date. The file said it was created on March 15th. Then I looked at the email she sent to the caterer. Every email has a hidden roadmap called its header. You can view it by finding an option like Show Original. It looks like a bunch of code, but it contains a timestamp for every server the email passed through. The very first one, the one from her computer, showed it was sent on April 10th. Her document was created almost a month before her email was sent. It was like finding a Roman coin dated 50 BC stamped with the words "Made in China." It was impossible, and it was the cornerstone of my case. Armed with my proof, I decided to give them one chance to back down. The monthly HOA meeting was that evening held in the community clubhouse, a boring room that smelled of pine cleaner and stale coffee. I walked in carrying a slim black binder. 11 board members sat around a long table with Brenda at the head, looking confident and pleased with herself. She saw me and her smile tightened. I waited for the open comment period at the end of the meeting's agenda. When my turn came, I stood up, binder in hand, and spoke in a calm, steady voice. I am here to address the event that has been scheduled at my private home without my permission, I said, and the $2,000 a day fine I received for closing my own gate. Brenda jumped in immediately, her voice full of fake concern. Michael, we've been over this. It's for the good of the community. A verbal agreement was made. I didn't look at her. I addressed the entire board. No such agreement was made, I said. My doorbell camera logs show that no one from this board has ever visited my property to get such an agreement. What did happen is that a forged rental contract with my signature was sent to a catering company. A few of the board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Brenda, however, became even more stubborn. Forgery is a very strong word, she said, her voice dripping with meanness. She then tried to use her best argument. Besides, there's a past history of this. We've used empty homes for events before with a simple handshake agreement. It's how we've always done things here. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the lie I knew she would tell. I opened my binder. Are you referring to a specific history? I asked, my voice still quiet. One of her friends, a slick-looking man named Sam, the board treasurer, nodded. Of course, he said. It's common practice. I laid a document on the table for them to see. That's interesting, I said, because this is a certified copy of a public records request I filed last week. It's for all temporary event permits issued in this neighborhood for the last 10 years. There are none, not one. I then turned to a new page in my binder. This is a summary of all large-scale social events listed in the HA Zone newsletters for the past 5 years. All of them took place either here in this clubhouse or at the public park, never on private property. I paused for a moment. There is no past history, I said. There are no handshake deals. There is only a forged document. The room was completely silent. Brenda's face was a mask of pure fury. She had been so confident in her power, so used to people giving up that she never imagined someone would bring proof. She never imagined someone would treat her neighborhood gossip like a legal deposition. I closed my binder with a soft click. I looked directly at Brenda, my gaze steady and unchanging. You can't vote against gravity, I said, my voice just above a whisper. And forged contracts fall the same way. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out of the room. As the door swung shut behind me, I saw my neighbor Tom leaning against the wall in the hallway. He'd been listening. He didn't say a word. He just looked at me, gave a slow nod, and held up his fist. I bumped it with my own. No words were needed. I had won the first skirmish, but I knew Brenda well enough to know she wouldn't surrender. She would escalate, and I would be ready. My small victory at the HOA meeting bought me about 48 hours of peace. Then on Thursday afternoon, the counterattack came. It didn't arrive with a loud bang, but with the quiet sound of an envelope being slid into my mailbox. It was a thick cream-colored envelope with the HOA logo on the corner. Inside was a 2-page letter from Brenda. The first page was titled, Our Sincere Apology. It was a masterpiece of fake niceness filled with phrases like, I regret any misunderstanding. And it seems we got our wires crossed. She was apologizing for my feelings, not for her actions. But the real trap was on the second page titled Community Event Release Form. It was a new document that asked me to say that the whole thing was a mix-up and to give permission for a new event in the future. In exchange, the HOA would drop the $2,000 a day fine. It looked like a peace offering, but it was a bear trap. A lawyer learns to read a document not just for what it says, but for what it doesn't say. This form never once mentioned forgery. Instead, it was carefully written to sound like I, the homeowner, had simply forgotten a previous conversation and was now being kindly given a chance to fix my mistake. If I signed it, I would be legally admitting that a verbal agreement had existed all along. I would be saying her lie was the truth and my entire case was fake. She wasn't trying to make peace. She was trying to get me to sign a confession. I took a black pen and wrote nice try in big letters across the top of the form. Then scanned both pages and saved them to my evidence folder under the file name Brenda's Fake Apology. The next morning, her campaign went public. When I went to get my newspaper, I found a glossy flyer tucked under the red flag of my mailbox. It was a professionally printed leaflet with a cheerful picture of the lake on the front. The headline read, "A note to our neighbors." The text was designed to hurt. We regret that Mr. Vance of the Lakefront Mansion is choosing not to host the annual welcome event after all. It read, he had previously agreed in spirit to share his beautiful new home with the community, but has since changed his mind. We are working to find an alternative place. It was a planned act of public shaming. In one paragraph, she had painted me as an unstable, promise-breaking person who lived alone. I walked down the street and saw the same flyer in every mailbox. She was turning the entire neighborhood against me, isolating me with a lie that was now printed in full color. I calmly took the flyer from my mailbox, went inside, and placed it in the evidence binder next to her fake apology. This was no longer just about forgery and trespassing. It was about attacking my character. She was attacking my reputation, and that was a line you did not cross. I knew this was her getting desperate, and desperate people make stupid mistakes. I just had to be ready to catch them when they did. The stupid mistake came later that evening. I was in my workshop in the basement sanding down a piece of oak for a new bookshelf when my phone buzzed with a notification from my security system. Motion detected at the garage. I pulled up the live feed on my phone. Two men I didn't know were standing by the large garage doors, shaking the handle. They looked around nervously before giving up and walking away. It was worrying, but it was what my driveway camera caught next that made my blood turn to ice. As the two men left, they met up with Sam, the HA treasurer, who was waiting by the street. The camera's microphone was sensitive, and it picked up their conversation clearly. "No good," one of the men said. "It's locked up tight." Sam sighed in frustration. "Brenda is going to lose her mind," he muttered. Then he said the words that changed everything. "If he's not going to host, maybe we just cut the power on party day. He'll give up when the air conditioning goes off." Cut my power. This had just moved from forgery to a criminal conspiracy. Their single stupid mistake wasn't the forgery anymore. It was underestimating just how far I would go to defend my home. They were planning to move from just bothering me with paperwork to actively trying to damage my home's essential systems. This crossed a new line from civil wrongdoing into a criminal plan. I saved the video file immediately, exporting a copy to my laptop and uploading another to a secure cloud server that Sarah had set up for me. That brought me to my second rule, the one I had lived by on every construction site I ever managed. How to prove it. Tip number 2, document everything, especially attempted sabotage. That night, I called an old friend, a retired master electrician named Dave. I explained the situation, and he came over first thing the next morning. Together, we installed a small, powerful solar battery backup system, connecting it directly to my home's most important parts, the fridge, the security system, the lights. Then we focused on the main electrical panel in the garage. Dave installed a heavy-duty steel lockbox over it. But I added one final touch. I mounted a tiny motion-activated USB camera inside the garage pointed directly at the new lockbox. The camera was plugged into a power bank and set to record any movement, saving the video wirelessly to the cloud. They could try to cut the power from the pole, but the house would stay on. And if they managed to break into the garage to get to the panel itself, Their every move would be recorded. The house was no longer just a home. It was a fortress of evidence. Let them come. I was ready. The day of the party that wasn't dawn bright and clear, a perfect spring Saturday. From my upstairs office window, which overlooked the long driveway and the lake beyond, I watched the neighborhood begin to stir. I felt a strange calm, the kind a chess player feels when he knows his opponent is walking into a trap he set 5 moves ago. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the first vehicle arrived. It was a large, brightly painted van with Groove Masters Mobile DJ written on the side. The driver, a young man with headphones around his neck, pulled up to my closed and locked gate, looked at it in confusion, and then parked on the side of the road. A few minutes later, a big food truck, smelling deliciously of grilled onions, rumbled up behind him, followed by a steady stream of cars. Soon, my quiet street looked like the parking lot for a county fair. Guests in party clothes got out of their cars carrying gift bags and casserole dishes, their faces a mixture of excitement and confusion. They gathered in small groups near the gate, pointing at the house, their voices a low murmur carried on the breeze. Brenda had not, it seemed, informed her guests of the cancellation. This was a public humiliation of her own making, and I was simply an observer. I sat in my chair, sipping a cool glass of iced tea, watching the chaos unfold. Around 3 o'clock, a cherry red convertible pulled up and Brenda Evans stepped out. She was dressed in a flowy white dress, looking the part of the gracious hostess. Her smile disappeared as she saw the scene. The locked gate, the confused guests, the blocked catering vehicles. Her face, for a split second, was a mask of pure fury. Then she composed herself, pulled out her phone, and I heard the distant ring of my landline. I let it go to voicemail. I watched her stab at her phone again, her movements sharp and angry. Then came the inevitable step up in the drama. A police car, its lights off, rolled slowly down the street and parked behind the DJ's van. 2 officers got out, their expressions tired. Brenda rushed toward them, pointing wildly at my house. They listened patiently, then walked up to my gate. One of the officers unclipped his radio. "Sir, this is the police." His voice boomed through a small speaker. "Would you please come to the gate?" I had been waiting for this. I had my documents ready in a neat stack on my desk. I picked them up, walked calmly downstairs, and went to the front door, opening it just enough to speak. "Good afternoon, officers," I said, my voice steady. "How can I help you?" The lead officer pointed back at Brenda. "Ma'am here says you're illegally blocking a pre-approved community event in violation of your HOA rules." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply held up my stack of papers. "Officers," I said, "this is a civil matter, but since you're here, you should see this." I had printed everything. I showed them the forged contract with the mismatched metadata highlighted in yellow. I showed them the screenshot of Brenda's email claiming she had my keys. I showed them the doorbell camera logs proving she had never visited my property to get a verbal agreement. And for the final piece, I showed them the printed HOA flyer, the one that admitted in writing that I had, in their own words, changed my mind. This was a clear admission that my permission was needed in the first place and was now withdrawn. The officers looked at the documents, then at each other. Their body cameras, I knew, were recording everything. "This looks like a pretty clear case if he said," she said, the first officer stated, though his tone suggested he knew exactly who was telling the truth. "It's a civil issue. We can't force him to open his gate." He handed the papers back to me, tipped his hat politely, and they walked back to their car. Brenda's face went pale as they spoke to her, then got back in their vehicle and drove away. Her authority, the very thing she had tried to use against me, had just publicly failed her. The aftermath was swift and digital. My phone started buzzing with texts from Tom. "You should see the HOA group email," he wrote. "She's losing it." Said, "You'll regret crossing her." Her carefully built image of the competent and control community leader was shattering in real time in front of all her neighbors. But Brenda had one last desperate move to make. As the sun began to set and her guests started to drift away in disappointment, a final email went out. This time, directly to the party's guest list, Tom forwarded me a copy. It was a shocking piece of character assassination. In it, Brenda claimed that the party had been canceled due to my increasingly unstable behavior. She painted me as a dangerous, grieving old man who was a threat to the community. She wrote that she had canceled the event out of a concern for guest safety. It was a cruel, cowardly lie designed to destroy my name and save her pride. It was also the final piece of evidence I needed. She had taken a simple disagreement and turned it into a public campaign of lies and defamation. I printed out that email, my hands perfectly steady. I punched holes in it and added it to the very back of my binder. The case against Brenda Evans wasn't just about a forged document anymore. It was about a systematic and malicious attack on my home, my character, and my peace, and it was now complete. The following Monday morning, at exactly 8:30 a.m., I walked into the county courthouse. It was a familiar place, though I was usually on the other side of the aisle arguing a different case. I wasn't there to answer a complaint. I was there to file one. I walked up to the clerk's window for small claims court, my binder tucked under my arm. Small claims is often seen as a place for minor disputes, but in our state, the limit was high enough for what I had in mind. I filed a single lawsuit against 4 defendants. The Homeowners Association as a corporate entity, Brenda Evans personally, Sam, the treasurer personally, and one other board member who had been vocally supportive of Brenda's actions. I was suing them for the maximum amount allowed, $100,000. The claim listed 4 specific crimes: property violation for the initial unauthorized entry, attempted fraud based on the forged document, reputational damage from the flyers and emails, and a plan to trespass and commit property damage supported by the video of Sam talking about cutting my power. Filing the suit was the easy part. The real work had already been done, collected piece by piece in my binder. The court date was set for 2 weeks later. When the day arrived, the small claims courtroom was more crowded than usual. Word had gotten around. I saw Tom sitting in the back row, giving me a solid, supportive nod. Brenda arrived with Sam and the other board member with the HA's lawyer, a man in an expensive suit, who looked deeply annoyed to be there. They sat at the defendant's table, whispering furiously. Brenda looked confident, even smug. She still believed she was in charge, that her version of the story, told with enough conviction, would win the day. When the judge called my case, I walked to the plaintiff's podium alone. I had no lawyer because I didn't need one. The truth, when properly organized, is its own best attorney. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Thompson, looked down at the paperwork. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice tired, "this is a serious claim for a small claims venue. You have 5 minutes to present your case." 5 minutes was more than I needed. "Your Honor," I began, my voice clear and steady. "This case is not about a disagreement. It's about a documented campaign of fraud, trespass, and defamation." I walked to the clerk and handed over 4 neatly labeled exhibits. "Exhibit A," I said as the judge examined the first document, "is the forged rental contract. If you look at the highlighted metadata, you will see it was created on March 15th, nearly a month before the defendants claimed that I verbally agreed to it. The document was created before the conversation even supposedly happened." I paused, letting that sink in. The HA's lawyer started to stand up, but the judge waved him down. "Exhibit B," I continued, "is a certified log from my home security system showing a complete video record of my front door for the past 60 days. It proves no member of the HOA ever visited my home to get the verbal agreement they claim exists. They lied about the document, and they lied about the conversation." I could see Brenda's smug expression begin to crack. The blood was draining from her face. "Exhibit C," I said, my voice remaining perfectly calm, "is a collection of communications from the defendants. It includes the flyers they distributed accusing me of breaking a promise I never made. It also includes an email from Ms. Evans to 97 residents in which she calls me mentally unstable and dangerous. This is clear and malicious defamation." The room was utterly silent. Now everyone, including the HA's own lawyer, was looking at Brenda. "Finally, Your Honor, Exhibit D." I pushed a small USB drive across the podium. "This is a video file from my security system timestamped 3 days before the scheduled event. It shows the defendant, Mr. Sam, planning with two people to commit property damage by illegally disabling my home's electrical service as a way to force me to do what they wanted. The judge looked at the evidence list, then over her glasses at Brenda's table. She didn't need to watch the video. The description was enough. She picked up the first exhibit, the forged PDF. She looked directly at Brenda. Miss Evans, did you create this document? Brenda hesitated. Lying in an email was one thing. Lying to a judge was another. Her lawyer frantically whispered in her ear. Yes, Your Honor, she said, her voice a small, tight squeak. But I had reason to believe. The judge cut her off. She tapped the highlighted metadata on the page with her finger. This document was created on March 15th, the judge said, her voice now like ice. She looked up from the paper, her eyes locking onto Brenda's. The court has seen enough. She turned to the HOA's lawyer. Counselor, you have 1 minute to explain why I shouldn't refer this matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. The lawyer stood, his face pale. He stammered, Your Honor, this has all been a profound misunderstanding. The judge held up a hand, silencing him. The silence in the room was absolute. Then Judge Thompson looked down at her papers and made her ruling. This case is closed, she said. The defendants are lucky Mr. Vance didn't press criminal charges for fraud and conspiracy. A sharp intake of breath came from the defendant's table. The judge picked up her gavel. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff in the full amount of $100,000 to be paid jointly and severally by the defendants. The sound of the gavel striking the woodblock cracked through the stunned silence like a gunshot. All it took was 4 pieces of paper and 1 damning video. The entire empire of lies and intimidation came down in the time it takes to boil an egg. The room was stunned. Brenda just sat there, her mouth open. Her empire of lies and intimidation was brought down by 4 pieces of paper and 1 damning video, all in the time it takes to boil an egg. The aftermath of the 5-minute verdict was as quiet as the judgment was loud. There were no public apologies, no dramatic fights on my lawn. There was only the slow, grinding process of consequences. The $100,000 judgment was a debt the HOA had to pay, which meant every homeowner, including me, had to cover the cost through a special assessment. The check I received from the HA's insurance company a few weeks later felt less like a victory and more like a refund. The real victory was the silence that followed. Brenda Evans was politically and socially ruined. Within a week of the judgment, an emergency HOA meeting was called, not by Brenda, but by a petition that went around among the homeowners. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. Tom told me later that the atmosphere was like a funeral. Brenda didn't even show up. Her resignation was read aloud by her lawyer, a dry, formal statement that took no real blame. It spoke of her many years of dedicated service and her decision to step down to pursue other interests. The last line was the only one that mattered. I take full responsibility for my actions and will step down effective immediately. Just like that, her reign was over. The structure of power she had built through intimidation and gossip dissolved overnight. A month later, on a crisp autumn morning, I was down at my dock cleaning of fish I had just caught from the lake. The water was still, reflecting the brilliant orange and yellow of the changing leaves. A new man was walking toward me. It was Tom. He had a clipboard in his hand and a look of mild frustration on his face. In the chaos following Brenda's resignation, the board had needed a new president, and everyone, tired of politics and drama, had nominated the one person they knew who didn't want the job. They had elected Tom. Can you believe this nonsense? He grumbled, holding up the clipboard. I'm president of the clubhouse committee now. I'd rather be rewiring a transformer in a hurricane. He sat down on the dock next to me, and we watched the water in comfortable silence for a moment. Then he tapped the clipboard. First order of business, he said. I passed a new rule. Unanimous vote. He cleared his throat and read from the sheet. Rule 1. There will be no events of any kind planned for any private residential property without a formal, written, notarized, and independently verified consent form signed by the legal owner of said property. He looked at me and grinned. I think I covered all the bases. I spent the rest of the day finishing the project I'd started before all this madness began. The new bookshelf for my office. As I put the final coat of sealant on the oak, I reflected on the whole ugly affair. It had been an unwanted war, a battle I never asked for but was forced to fight. But in the end, it taught me something important. Bullies, whether they're in a schoolyard or an HOA boardroom, thrive on noise and chaos. They want you to get angry, to yell, to get emotional. Because when you're emotional, you make mistakes. My strategy had been the opposite. I met their chaos with calmness. I met their lies with documentation. I never raised my voice because I didn't have to. The truth, when it's organized and presented clearly, is louder than any tantrum. That was the final lesson, the one I wrote down for myself. You don't need to raise your voice when the truth is loud enough. Later that evening, I placed the finished bookshelf in my office. Right by the window overlooking the lake, I arranged my law books on one shelf and Helen's favorite novels on another. On the very top, I placed the cherrywood box with her ashes. Right next to it was a small frame photo of the two of us on the day we bought our first fixer-upper 30 years ago. I looked out the window at the new gate I had installed. It was stronger than the old one with a modern keypad lock and a small private camera mounted just above it. Some people guard their homes with signs that say, "Beware of dog." I guard mine with truth and a 5-minute verdict. But the real victory wasn't the verdict. It was the peace that came after. The quiet returned, but this time it was a quiet I had earned. It wasn't the lonely, heavy silence I had left behind. It was a new kind of peace, one that I knew was finally mine to keep.